Before we begin this week's episode of the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, I want to tell you of a great guide that I made just for you. It's the 12 financial mistakes that keep physicians from building wealth. After talking to hundreds of physicians, I've heard many mistakes, and these are the ones that I thought were most important to share so that you can potentially avoid making these mistakes, or if you've already made them, learn a bit about how you might be able to recover. You can grab the guide at my website, www.growyourwealthymindset.com/12 financial mistakes. Now on to this week's episode. Hello, welcome to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast, where it is all about helping amazing physicians just like you create a wealthy life free from burnout and with the financial security to practice medicine on your own terms. I'm your host, Dr. Elisa Zhang. Hello, and welcome back to the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. I'm a big proponent on tracking your spending and creating a spending plan, which to me differs very much from a budget. In my mind, a budget is like a diet. It's something restrictive. People tend to say that they're on a diet, meaning that they're working on eating less calories. Though it could mean eating particular food, but that's all restricting yourself to certain foods. Often, when people think about budgeting, it's so that they'll spend less or only spend specific amounts in different categories. Tracking your spending is being aware of your spending. I use a spending plan to plan ahead on how much I estimate or want to spend in different categories. Depending on my actual spending, I'll adjust my spending plan. In the last year, I've increased the amount for groceries, which I really feel like the cost has gone up with inflation. We don't go to the grocery store thinking that we're only going to spend X dollars a week on groceries. We buy what groceries we want and need, and we track how much we're spending on groceries, and then adjust our spending plan accordingly. If I see that there's a month where we spent significantly more on groceries, I may look into more of why that might be the case. Usually it's something like we went to the Asian grocery store and stocked up on things like a 50-pound bag of rice. If I notice an increased spending in a category that I don't particularly value, there is a possibility I'll look at what spending is going on there and potentially make a change. One example could be if the cost of my home insurance really suddenly seemed to go up from the previous year, I may talk to my insurance broker about why that is happening and discuss potential other insurance companies that we may want to look at or changing some aspect of my policy. For this episode, I thought I'd really put myself out there. So I'm going to go over how we, meaning my husband and I, track expenses and our spending plan, what it is at the beginning of the year, and the actual amount that we spend. For our spending plan, we do have a fiscal year of July to June. This is because I actually started tracking my spending when I was in college. And in college, we kind of work on the academic school year. My husband is a high school teacher, so we've kind of stuck to that academic calendar. He was teaching while I was in medical school and grad school, so we still were kind of on that academic year calendar. Since I have started my own businesses, it's making more sense to go with a regular calendar year so that tracking my business expenses really fall in line with taxes and filing for taxes, but I haven't quite made that switch. Before I talk about how we track our spending, I want to say that how you track your spending is up to you. The way my husband and I do it is not necessarily the right way, but we've been doing it this way for a long time, so it's just become our habit. If you're not tracking your spending, then I encourage you to find a way to start tracking your spending and try to make it as easy for you as possible and try to make it in a way that you can make it your habit. What we do is we enter all our spending into spreadsheets. My husband will put his spending into a shared Google spreadsheet, and then I'll combine our spending into an Excel sheet, which is on my laptop. I review the spending on the spreadsheet with the charges made to our credit cards, as well as any drafts from our bank accounts to ensure that all the money going out is correct and there's no unusual charges or drafts. I put each expense into its own category and then sum up the expenses for each month. Then I track our expenses month to month. I go over our finances and spending about once a month, and it usually does take me a couple of hours to go over everything. I personally actually enjoy looking over the numbers. I kind of lose track of time when I'm looking at all of our numbers, but I realize this is somewhat time consuming, and there are people who are not going to want to spend their time looking at their spending. and correlating it with the charges on their credit card statements. There are different apps as well as software that can help you track your spending. You may want to check out my podcast episode, number 25, Tools to Help Track Your Net Worth and Spending, which released back in November 16, 2022. It goes over multiple apps and programs that you could potentially try using for yourself. I've personally tried using Mint, which is no longer available, as well as Personal Capital, which is now called Empower. Even after using these, I've just gone back to using my Excel spreadsheets. I know a lot of people like YNAB because of its forward spending projections, though I've also heard that there's a somewhat steep or decent learning curve with YNAB. Again, whatever you choose, it should be something that you will actually do and something that you can create a habit out of doing. You could also download the transactions from your credit cards and bank accounts instead of recording all the receipts. This won't help you make sure that there aren't any errors necessarily, but if you look over the transactions, you can probably pick out something that doesn't seem quite right. You'll also miss anything that you pay with cash, but if you don't use a lot of cash, it probably doesn't matter much. My husband and I rarely use cash. We don't really keep very much of it on us. We like that by charging on credit cards, we get points as well as it's really easy to track the spending that way. Another thing to mention before we get into the numbers is how much we pay ourselves first. We invest a minimum of 25% of our gross income annually and often invest more, but 25% actually comes out before any of our spending. This includes investing in stocks and bond index funds, individual US government bonds, as well as real estate. I'm not including our investments when we discuss our spending plan. Another caveat with the spending plan is that some of my expenses are a mix of business and personal, but get written off as a business expense. For example, I would still be paying for tax prep even if I didn't have businesses because I still have to file my personal taxes as well as my investments. Because I do have businesses, I am able to write off my accountant as a business expense because it's doing my business taxes, which then flow back into my personal taxes. Some of my choices on spending for things like going to conferences as well as programs is dependent on my business income. Though I've also spent a significant amount of my personal money on coaching as well as business coaching. While I have a line item for personal development on my personal spending plan, the amount actually spent varies significantly year to year depending on how my businesses are doing. I keep that line item on my personal spending plan since even if I didn't have a business, I would want to hold space towards spending towards my personal growth. That could even be something that I might spend on something like piano lessons. My household consists of my husband and myself. We do not have children, and we currently don't have any pets. So when you hear about some of these expenditures, it is for 2 adults. Let's get into the numbers. I'm going to round to the nearest dollar since I think that makes for easy listening as opposed to me saying the exact amount spending, so everything's rounded to the nearest dollar. We estimate spending $450 a month for groceries for an annual budget of $5,400. During the year I'm going to review, which is from July 2023 to June 2024, and that's our last full whole fiscal year that I have all the numbers, we ended up spending $4,965, which means that we underspent by $435, or nearly a month of what we had estimated. Our lowest monthly spend was $264, and our highest monthly spend was $566. So it's really around that $450 range. As I mentioned before, I've noticed actually from July 2024 up to current day that we're averaging over $450 a month, which is from what I believe is inflation, because I don't think our eating or purchasing habits from the grocery store has changed very much in the last year versus the year before. We mostly eat at home, and we mostly follow a pescatarian diet at home. We do have friends who have farms and they raise animals, so we bought eggs as well as meat from our friends, but I'm really trying to stay away with buying meat from commercial sources other than seafood. Groceries is one of those expenses that varies dramatically across different households. I know of households of 2 adults and 2 children who spend around $400 a month, and others that spend closer to $2,000 a month. There are some people I've talked to who just say that they spend a ridiculous amount of groceries and don't want to even disclose how much that is. So it could be well over $2,000 a month. Don't judge yourself based on my numbers, as long as you like how you're spending your money. I know of a woman physician who is really frugal with her family in many other ways, but they are not frugal with groceries. And they're among the families of four who do spend over $2,000 a month in groceries. They buy lots of organic, fresh fruit and vegetables, as well as really high quality seafood. Of course, how much you spend on groceries can be impacted by how much you spend on takeout or dining out. Our dining out is actually part of our entertainment category, which includes going to movies, Broadway shows, concerts, and museums. We plan an average of $300 a month or $3,600 a year in this category. We ended up only actually spending $2,348 for the year, with some months not spending anything at all, and in one month we spent $450. I really enjoy hiking and kayaking. We own our own kayaks, so both of those activities really only cost us the gas it takes to get to the location where we're going to go hiking or kayaking. I live in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, and the Cleveland Museum of Art is an amazing art museum that's free other than special exhibits. The Cuyahoga County Library and the Cleveland Library Systems are excellent, and they have a lot of movies on Blu-ray, which we borrow and can watch at home. I also borrow a lot of books and audiobooks through our local library system. We have had Netflix in the past, but don't currently subscribe to any streaming services. For many people, their largest single monthly expense is their mortgage. We own our home, so we don't have a mortgage. Our property taxes were $6,828 in 2024, though they've increased somewhat significantly in 2025. Where we are, property taxes generally increase every 3 years. Our monthly utilities are estimated at $430 a month, which includes our cell phones, as well as things like electricity, gas, as well as the cost of upkeeping our well and septic tank. We set aside $17,000 a year for household maintenance, which includes putting money aside for future home repairs and renovations. We ended up spending $5,910 on refinishing wood floors, as well as rebuilding our chimney and some other minor work. We also did put on a new roof, but that ended up being covered by insurance from storm and hail damage, which really was a blessing. The money that doesn't get spent in this specific category gets essentially put forward in order to cover any future expense, like when we eventually will have to replace our septic tank. You may be wondering why $17,000 a year? Well, our home was built in the 1960s, and so we expect to have to do more renovations than if you have a newer home. Generally, I recommend to people to consider having 1 to 4% of the value of their home set aside for home maintenance and future renovation projects. This would include things like replacing appliances as they break down, or even repairing appliances, and covering the cost of fixing or replacing your furnace, AC, heat pump, hot water tank, roof, siding, painting your house, all those things that you need to keep up your home. If you have a newer home, you can save a lower percentage because there's probably not as many things coming up. But if you have an older home, you probably want to side more to a larger percentage. The value of your home is also going to somewhat make a difference. If you have a $250,000 home or a $500,000 home, the cost for a hot water tank for either home would really cost the same, but would be a higher percentage compared to 250 as it would be compared to a $500,000 home. For household supplies and clothes, we estimate about $200 a month or $2,400 a year. We ended up spending $2,272, so that was pretty accurate for us. There was at least one month where we didn't spend anything, but then there was another month where we spent $929. So this can be a pretty big range. My husband and I give each other $100 a month for what we call fun stuff. For him, that's mostly video games. For me, it could be books, audiobooks, Taylor Swift albums, plants, outdoor supplies, or SD cards for my camera. These are the things that we can buy without talking to the other person, just because we want. We also have a line item for big item purchases, which includes rotating electronics. Similar to the household maintenance expense, whatever doesn't get spent in a given year in this category gets rolled over to the next year. And that's actually rolled over in terms of it's sitting in a savings account or bucket for future use for that category. We expect to buy a new laptop for each of us about every 3 years, as well as buying a new phone for each of us about every 3 years. We may spend somewhere around $2,000 to $2,500 on a laptop and maybe $600 to $1,000 on a phone. In this fiscal year, we only bought one new phone, so we had a lot left over. But there are other years where both my husband and I might end up buying a laptop and we spend a lot in that particular category. We might buy some other electronic peripherals. Like I've been thinking about getting another monitor so I'm not using my laptop monitor at home. Or we may get something like an external hard drive. Just from our prior spending habits, that seems to be about $3,000 a year, averaged out over many years. We also have a line item for gifts that is another $100 a month or $1,200 a year. But for this fiscal year, we only spent $548 of that. The next category is transportation. We both own our own cars and we pay cash for them. We set aside $350 a month for the next car purchase, which sits in a high yield savings account until we're ready to buy our next car. We actually bought a new car for my husband last December because we're anticipating the increase in prices buying a car with President Trump's tariffs. It was actually earlier than we would have otherwise bought a new car. We replaced a 12-year-old car, which was working fine, but we didn't want to be in a position where we had to buy a new car and prices were high. In the past, we've had to replace two cars, basically at the point where we would have to put more into repairs than the car was worth, and we could no longer drive the cars in their current condition. Where we live also has a lot of snow and we salt the roads, so our cars probably don't last as long as if you were living somewhere like Southern California or Texas or someplace without snow. We do buy new cars and plan on keeping them for their useful life. We both talk about how it would be more frugal if we bought a used car since so much of a car's value is lost in the first 3 years. But we really like having a car that we know no one's driven, nothing's happened to it that we don't know about. And we can afford to do that, so that's what we do. We do at this point pay cash for our cars. For my current car, I had the cash I would have needed to buy the car outright, but I got a 0.9% interest rate. So I kept that money in the high yield savings account to pay off that car. And the interest rate I was getting in that high yield savings account was higher than the 0.9% interest rate I was paying. We plan on $200 a month for gas, but I changed jobs, which minimized commuting. So we actually only ended up spending $1,143 for the year instead of the planned $2,400. Our spending for gas ranged from $43 a month to $310 a month. The month where it was $310 was the month that we did a road trip over spring break, and I didn't account for the gas cost in our travel plan. We also set aside $1,500 a year for car maintenance and another $580 for tolls, parking, B&B registration, and other transportation-related expenses. We don't have a lot of tolls around us, but when we drive to Chicago to visit my sister, we do end up driving on a toll road. We ended up spending $674 for maintenance and another $265 in that other transportation category. For medical expenses, we set aside $100 a month in a flexible healthcare spending account. We ended up spending $1,360, which was more than the $1,200 we had set aside due to needing a CT scan, as well as 2 ultrasounds we didn't expect. We don't usually meet our healthcare deductible, though we did get close this last fiscal year. We pay $4,549 in healthcare premiums, which are deducted from my husband's paycheck. Our other insurance costs include home insurance, auto insurance, umbrella liability insurance, own occupation disability insurance, which I have for myself as well as my husband, as well as term life insurance. And all that adds up to $16,692 a year. We also plan for $200 a month for services like haircuts and massages. Our actual spend was $1,620, so that's less than the $2,400 budgeted, even though I really try to get a massage at least once a month and sometimes twice a month. We also have a CPA where I pay a subscription fee of $229 a month, as well as a legal subscription that's $100 a month. These are expenses that get written off as part of my business, but we would still have the expense of paying these professionals even if I didn't have my own businesses. The largest category in our spending is travel. For 2023 to 2024, I planned for $30,000, but ended up spending $44,137. This happened because we ended up having essentially 2 summer vacations in the same fiscal year, because again, our fiscal year goes from July to June. So here's all the traveling we did. We went to Iceland for 2 weeks in July and August of 2023. Then in the fall, I went to Utah to see the annular solar eclipse. Over winter break, we went to Argentina and Antarctica, a trip that was postponed from 2020 due to the pandemic. The deposit for the ship to Antarctica was paid in 2020, but the remaining deposit was paid in 2023. So it was the remaining deposit that got tracked as part of the travel plan for the fiscal year I'm going over. We did a road trip over spring break, which I mentioned when I was talking about gas. Then we went to Croatia, Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Slovenia in June of 2024, which is why that got included in the same year as our summer trip to Iceland. We typically travel in late July, early August, since my birthday is August 8th, and I usually like to go on vacation for my birthday. However, for Croatia, it would be much warmer and much more busy, as well as cost more to go in July, August. So we opted to go in June when the weather was beautiful and we had an amazing time. For our current year, going from 2024 to 2025, I've actually planned for $50,000 in travel, and it looks like we actually may even be exceeding that by a few $1,000s. So our total spend ended up being around $114,250, with an additional $4,200 set aside for the next car, $2,600 set aside for future larger expenses or electronics, and $11,000 set aside for future home repairs. This adds up to a total of $132,000. Our original spending plan started the year out at $128,858. By tracking our spending over the years, I really have a good idea of how much we spend and how much we can spend. It also gives me a good idea of how much we would likely spend if we weren't working and the costs that we could potentially cut back on. Of course, I still think I'm going to want to travel a lot when I'm no longer working, but there'll be some point where the travel will definitely slow down, or I'll be doing travel that's maybe not as expensive. Antarctica was one of the most expensive trips I've gone on. And currently, I'm finding myself doing trips that are trips I've been waiting on because of how much they cost. For example, this summer, we're going to do an East Africa safari, which is also kind of a big ticket item type of trip. I know in Western society, we really don't talk very much about money, and people really don't get a sense of how much is, quote, normal to spend in any given category. I hope by my sharing my numbers, it gives you a much more of an idea of where spending could be at. Again, I don't want you to judge yourself for your current spending, but I hope that this was helpful for you. I'd really love to get your feedback on this episode, so please let me know what you thought of it and what you got out of it by emailing me at growyourwealthymindset@gmail.com. If you could use some help organizing your personal finances, creating a spending plan, and learning how to track your spending, I'm here for you. I found that some people avoid looking at their financial situation out of shame or embarrassment. There's no reason to have shame about not being organized with your finances. If no one has taught you how to manage and handle money, then there's no reason to think you should be able to have magically known how to do it. I'm happy to teach and mentor you, as well as coach you through any mindset issues you may have over money so that you can become confident in managing your own finances and investments. If you're interested in learning more about what it's like to work with me, set up a Zoom meeting at www.growyourwealthymindset.com. I'd love to talk to you. Thank you so much for being a listener of the Grow Your Wealthy Mindset podcast. I hope this episode helps open up conversation around money, spending money, saving money, and investing money. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could share it with your friends and colleagues. And now for the disclaimer. I am not a certified financial planner, accountant, or attorney, and nothing I say should be construed as professional investment, tax, or legal advice. This show is primarily for your education and entertainment. I am a physician, but I'm probably not your physician. So if you need any medical advice, please contact your own physician. Thank you. Don't forget to pick up your guide, 12 Financial Mistakes That Keep Physicians from Building Wealth. You can grab that guide at my website, www.growyourwealthymindset.com/12 financial mistakes. You'll also find that link in the show notes.